Hello, everybody. What time is it? If you're older, I know what you just said, and I promise I won't tell anybody how old you are. However, here we are. We are ready to get rolling with Betty in a moment with a collection of bedtime Bible stories for children. And hope all of you have your copy. Some of you like to pull it out and look at it and read with us. And there are others who take notes when we're reading. This has been a busy week for Betty. I can't wait to ask her a few questions. So, this week, I need for you to go to the book of Judges. Book of Judges. And we are in chapter 19. Now, the reason why I'm telling you that is, here we have, looking back here, 25 chapters in this book. We are at 19 right now. And Betty was getting concerned about that. So Betty and I have been having conversations about a lot of things this week. We've been talking about some of the things that we need to be doing more together. We've been talking about the places she and I ought to go along with her sister and her cousins. And we've been really enjoying that. I think sometimes the reason we were doing that this week is because it was a way of being able to step aside from the fact that the kids are back in school. So I need to ask all of you there, are you excited about being back in school, but not being back in school? Well, that's a tough one. And you probably wonder what that has to do with this book. Well, in a few minutes, you're going to find out. Because, keep in mind, all of the Israelites wanted to graduate. And so they had to keep on following and listening. But they went to a school that required their attendance for 40 years. Yeah, that's a pretty long time. I don't know how many degrees a person would get after 40 years. I have a few that I picked up along the way. But here we have the Jews and the Canaanites. Well, Betty's going to sneak in the middle. But we are sitting in our backyard here, a little area that we have been able to rope off. And it's a place where Betty likes to come, and she likes to think and pray and talk with me about anything that might come to her mind. So if you'll go to Judges 1, the Jews and the Canaanites, I'm going to get started. Then at the right time, guess who makes an appearance? Well, God had commanded the children of Israel not to make covenants with the Canaanites when they got into the promised land. But the Jews found that the Canaanites were pretty tough fighters. And the Jews themselves were pretty tough fighters. So the Canaanites offered to come to terms with the Jews and share the land with them. The Canaanites wanted to enter into alliances with the Jews to make treaties with them. And the Jews thought this would be easier than fighting all the time, so they did. The reason God had wanted the Jews to drive out the Canaanites was that he knew if the Jews settled down and lived side by side with the Canaanites, before long, they'd be sneaking off to worship the Canaanite gods. I wonder if that's happening in our world today. I wonder if our culture has some gods out there right now that people are worshiping. Well, the Jews were pretty faithful to Jehovah. Remember, that's the fancy name for God. I am Yahweh. As long as the people that had known Yeshua, and fought side by side with him were still alive. But as peace prevailed, and a new generation of Jews grew up in Canaan, sure enough, they began to do just as God had feared, and worship Baal, or as Americans say, Baal, and Ashtaroth, which were the gods of the Canaanites. Now, the Jews had settled down and made agreements with the Canaanites so that they could have peace and not have to fight all the time. But it didn't turn out that way. As soon as they got peaceful, as soon as they got peaceful, their enemies attacked them and began to drive them out of their lands. A fierce people called Philistines, or Philistines as Americans say, invaded the land and captured the cities along the coast and drove out the Israelites, who moved back into the less fertile land of the mountains. But worst of all, an army from a place called Mesopotamia invaded and conquered the whole land. And all the Jews became subject to Mesopotamia, and they paid tribute. And then, at that very moment, something happened. Betty came with the Mesopotamians. Oh my goodness, how are you? I told everybody you're back in school. I know.
We were watching in the car.
Oh my goodness. Well, the children of Israel knew that God was punishing them for going off to church with the Canaanites and worshiping false gods, and they repented and were very sorry. They began to go only to their own church and worship the true God, Jehovah. So God said, okay, I guess they've learned their lesson. And he looked around for someone to lead the Jews in a war of independence against the Mesopotamians. Well, I bet you can't say that 4 times fast. Mesopotamians.
You can.
You can, okay.
Well, you
can. I? Okay.
But not me.
No, well, I don't.
Mexican.
Well, it's not, it's not a real. There aren't any places by that name in Texas. They've taken a lot of names in Texas from overseas. He found just the person in a man named Othniel. Othniel was a nephew of Caleb, one of the 2 spies that Moses originally sent to spy out the land of Canaan, who actually had faith and believed they could capture it. Othniel, you see, belonged to a courageous, brave family, had a good tradition to follow. The Jews had belonged to Mesopotamia. Say again.
Mesopotamia.
Whoa, for 8 years, when Othniel raised the flag of rebellion and fought against Mesopotamia. The Jews won and established their independence. 40 years later, a whole new generation of Jews had grown up, and they too forgot God and began to sneak off and go to church with the Canaanites and worship false gods. And God said, oh no, there we go again. Are you hot?
Yes.
Okay, you can use that. There you go. So, God let the Moabites conquer the Israelites, and the Jews became subject to the king of Moab. Now, the king of Moab was a fellow named Eglon. Can you imagine what it'd be like on Zoom for going back to school if you had friends named Eglon who were from Mesopotamia? So,
if he was the first day of school and the teacher was like,
I know.
how do you pronounce your name?
Well, that's a tough one. One time when I was in grade school, one of my friends decided to play a trick on the teacher and wrote down the name that on the first day of school that one of the students named was Chuck Roast, and that his buddy was signing up that day. His name was Pete Moss. So anyway, you can play some tricks on names sometimes in school.
Did they change names?
They were teasing.
Oh.
Yeah, but if I had the name Eglon, I might change my name too. So.
Well,
Switch?
They switch them?
They did. They switched it back eventually, yeah. One time they chose a man named Ehud, a Benjaminite, to carry the tribute money to Eglon. Now, Eglon was glad to receive Ehud, and he didn't suspect anything, but Ehud had thought up a trick and was determined to assassinate the tyrant and free his people. When he presented the money to King Eglon, he whispered, I have a secret message for the king. Now, very few people can resist a secret. So Eglon sent everybody out of the room. When Ehud was alone with the king, he approached him as though he was going to whisper into his ear. Eglon's little pig eyes glistened with excitement, for he thought Ehud was going to tell him something very private, and Eglon just loved a political intrigue. You know, it's kind of like some people like gossip. You know what gossip is?
I think it means, news, kind of.
Yeah, it is kind of like news. It's oftentimes what you call talking behind people's backs.
Yeah.
Yeah, not good.
And just people who spotted them and just telling other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Actually, gossip is pretty bad because you can see what it did in here, but it also is what happened when they started telling gossip about Jesus. Many, many, many years later, they started gossiping about him.
What is that?
Well, they started saying false things about him, but they told a lot of people. So it's, he stirs up the people. No, back when they crucified Jesus. It was very sad. But instead, Ehud slipped a dagger out of his sleeve and shoved it up to the hilt into Eglon's belly.
What's a dagger?
It's a knife. And he died right there. Yeah, kind of like a short one. Yeah.
A knife?
Yeah, like a knife, yeah.
I thought you meant like a sword.
No, I know. No,
A sword is long.
a sword is long.
And then a knife is little.
Yeah.
Like a cooking knife.
That's right. And a dagger's more like a cooking knife. But it looks to me like they were going to cook his goose. So different need. Then Ehud slipped out and locked the door behind him. And when the members of Eglon's court returned and found the door locked, they thought Eglon didn't want to be disturbed. So it was a long time before they broke down the door and found out what had happened. By that time, Ehud was long gone. Ehud gathered together an army of Israelites and attacked the Moabites. And the Moabites were so confused without their king that the Jews defeated them and regained their freedom. 80 years passed. That's a long time. You know, I'm getting close to 80, but 80 years is a long time. And once more the Jews began to go to church with the Canaanites and worship the heathen gods, because you see, by now a whole new generation had grown up and had forgotten what happened to them when they were unfaithful to Jehovah. God put up with it about as long as he could.
Wait, is Jehovah Jesus or God?
God.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes it's Yahweh, it's said, and sometimes it's just I am. Yeah. And I guess he thought the Jews were sure stupid and took a lot of teaching. Sure enough, along came a Canaanite king by the name of Jabin, who had a chief general named Sisera. And he conquered and oppressed the Jewish people for about 20 years. Now, what's 20 years? Now, that's how long your Aunt Renee and your Uncle Ethan have been married. Yeah. The Jews couldn't fight against Sisera because he had 900 war chariots, and the Jews only had foot soldiers. Finally, the Jews caught up and repented, praying to God to forgive them and deliver them out of the hands of their Canaanite enemies. God looked around for a proper leader to inspire the Jews to unify them and to lead them into battle. And who do you think they picked? This time, he picked a woman, a prophetess, like a female prophet, named Deborah, that the Jews already thought a lot of, for they used to go to her to settle their arguments. She was like a lawyer, or as the Bible calls it, a judge. Deborah prayed, and God visited her and gave her a plan of battle. But she needed a military captain, so she called on a man named Barak and told him that God said to gather together a host and go fight against Sisera at a certain river. But Barak was afraid, so he said he wouldn't go to fight unless Deborah would go along too. Deborah said, okay, but if you take me along, you won't get the glory you'd have if you did it alone, because the people will say that it took a woman to lick the Canaanites. But that didn't faze Barak, because he really was afraid, and he didn't want the glory anyway. So they got together, an army of 10,000 men, and Sisera heard of it and mustered her own army and all of his chariots, and the two armies went out looking for each other. Finally, they met in battle. The Canaanites were defeated. And Sisera's chariot was turned over. And Sisera ran away on foot from the battle. Now, King Jabin's Canaanites had forced a tribe of Kenites descended from Kenites. Kenites. Is that an interesting thing? How would you like to say, hey, I come from a family of Kenites? Well, they were descended from Moses' father-in-law to join with them as allies, and the head man of the Kenites was Heber, who had a wife named Jael. The Kenites liked their kinsfolk, the Jews, and had only joined with the Canaanites because they had been defeated and forced to. As Sisera fled from the battle, he came to the house of Heber, and Jael was at home all by herself. And you know what we do?
Oh, no.
Every time they go by, here's what we do. Right? Yeah, we pray for people. We're praying, Lord, that you will protect anybody who's affected right now. So, she gave him the guest room. Sisera was exhausted. And after she had fed him supper, and while he was sound asleep, she took a big spike and a sledgehammer and drove the spike into his head and killed him. Then went and told Barak what she had done. With his general dead, King Jabin didn't stand a chance, and the war continued until the Israelites were free once more. Deborah composed a long victory song, which you can read in the 5th chapter of the book of Judges. 40 years of peace passed, and another generation of Jews grew up and grew careless, and again worshiped false gods. Once again, God had to teach them a lesson. This time he sent the Midianites, who conquered the Israelites and ruled over them for 7 years. The Midianites and their Amalekite allies plundered and burned the cities and destroyed the crops and killed Jews right and left, and the surviving Jews had to hide out in caves in the mountains. Boy, there was a rough crew. The Jews again repented and prayed for deliverance. God sent an angel to a man named Gideon, and he told him to lead the Jews against their enemies. But Gideon was skeptical. He wasn't real clear or real sure, and kind of doubted, and asked for a sign. So the angel told him to fix him some supper, and he did. Then the angel said to put the supper on the table, which is a good thing, right? Better than eating off the floor, I guess. And Gideon did. Then the angel touched the supper dishes with his staff, and they disappeared in a puff of smoke. Well, that's what happens to me sometimes when I put something on the grill, I'm afraid. And Gideon knew that the angel was sure enough an angel. And Gideon went out there that very night and destroyed an altar to the god Baal that was nearby. And the disciples of Baal or Baal were right out about it and wanted to kill Gideon. By the way, if you ever go to a motel sometime and you open up the drawer, if it's a good hotel, it's going to have a Bible in there, a Gideon Bible. Yeah, I love it. But Gideon was still a bit skeptical and asked God for another sign. He put a woolly sheepskin on the ground, and the next morning the dew was on the sheepskin, but the ground was dry. And the following night the dew was on the ground and the sheepskin was dry. So Gideon figured by then that God had given him evidence enough. So he gathered an army to go fight against the Amalekites and the Midianites, who were at that time ravaging through the countryside. God said to Gideon, "You've got too big an army. If I deliver the Midianites into your hand by such a host, you'll think you won because of your own strength." So Gideon took all the soldiers and told them, if anybody that was afraid here could go home. And 22,000 did. Can you imagine that? That must have been a big parade. And only 10,000 remained. Then God said to Gideon, "That's still too many." And so Gideon proposed a test. Acting on God's orders, Gideon took all the soldiers down to the river to get a drink. And those that got down on their hands and knees to drink were sent home. Those that remained on their feet and were alert for a possible sign of the enemy and lapped up water from their hands, these Gideon kept. Because see, the ones who were looking down, they wouldn't have seen the enemy. Eventually, all he had left were 300 men. And God said, that's enough. That night, Gideon slipped down under the cover of darkness and crept up to the camp of the enemy and listened to their talk as they sat around their campfires and discovered that they were really afraid of him. So he returned to his own camp and gave each of his 300 men a trumpet and a pitcher with a lamp in it and had them surround the Midianite camp. At a signal, they all broke their pitchers and tooted on their trumpets, and the Midianites looked around and saw all the flickering torches and heard all the trumpets blowing and thought they were being attacked by an army of millions of Israelites. In the darkness and the confusion, they started killing each other. And finally, they all ran away while the Jews sat out on the hillside and kept blowing their horns. And they laughed and laughed, for they had run a great battle without having to do any fighting at all. What happened next?
Let's find out.
When?
Next week.
Next week. Do you have anything you want to tell the people what it's like to be on a Zoom school?
I think we might have to, next week, I think we might have to, I'm on the phone and you're filming because I'm going to be at Great Wolf Lodge.
Oh, okay. We'll figure out something. That's good. So you're going to get a nice little break.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that. Well, we can figure out something. But tell me this. When you're on Zoom and you're taking classes, do you see your teacher?
Yes.
Oh, that's good. Have you ever seen that teacher before?
Well, one of my teachers was a teacher in kindergarten, so I've seen her before, but I don't think I've seen the other two teachers.
So the first time you really met these other teachers was on Zoom. You go like this, hi, from Zoom. What do you do?
I met them when I was getting my supplies.
So when you got your supplies, you were able to meet them. That makes me happy. And do you think this is going to work okay, being in school like this?
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Is there anything that we need to tell? Let's see. We had a special time this past week. Nana and I had our 53rd wedding anniversary. Isn't that amazing? Unbelievable. And you know what we were thanking God for on our 53rd wedding anniversary? 53 years ago, we had no idea that we'd have a Betty. God bless everybody.